Are we wired for bliss? The brain is incredibly plastic. The four emotions of the limbic brain are fear, feeding, scarcity, fighting, and predatory sexuality. So I'd like to take us through a very quick tour of the brain, of these four different brains, and how each one of them changes. Are we wired for ceremony and ritual? Are we wired for bliss? This is a very exciting question because as we understand more about the human brain, we understand that the brain is incredibly plastic. In fact, neuroplasticity is one of the qualities of the human brain. The ability to learn, the ability to break out of habits and patterns of thinking. But what part does ceremony and ritual play in this process? As you know, I'm a medical anthropologist and I have a PhD in psychology and practiced psychology for many years and discovered that my patients were actually understanding more and more of the origins of their pathology, but they were not necessarily getting better or feeling better or able to change destructive habits in their life. So how could I help them really go through a profound transformation and not just an increasingly complex understanding of their psychodynamic? So, as an anthropologist, I had the opportunity of living and traveling through the Amazon and the high Andes mountains and spending time with indigenous societies whose psychology was very closely tied with their religious ceremony. So this morning, I'd like to relate this to the human brain. And as you know, we have a brain, we actually have four brains inside of our skull. We have four evolutionarily different brains that developed over the course of millions of years of evolution. So I'd like to take us through a very quick tour of the brain, of these four different brains, and how each one of them changes so that we can perhaps explore how we can work with these modalities of the brain to facilitate change in our patients and in the organizations that we work with. The very first and most ancient of these brains is the reptilian brain that we actually share with the reptiles. And this is the brain of housekeeping. This brain is in charge of all of the autonomic functions in the body, from blood pressure to breathing to body temperature. And in humans, respiration, breathing is an autonomic function. So we cannot stop breathing. We're programmed to breathe. So nobody's ever committed suicide by holding their breath. But it's not the same across all species. Dolphins, for example, do not have breathing programmed as an autonomic function. They have to choose to take each breath. They have to go, wow, that felt really good. I think I'll try another one. And if they're not happy in the amusement park that they happen to be trapped in, they have been known to go to the deep end of the pool and sink to the bottom and choose to stop breathing to commit suicide. But for us humans, breathing is an autonomic function, and luckily we don't have to dedicate a whole lot of brain power to regulating our body temperature, though the Tibetan masters in the high Himalayan mountains are able to regulate their body temperature. They have a practice known as tumo, or creating body heat, generating heat. And one of their initiatory practices has to do with taking bed sheets and putting them in ice water, making a hole through the ice in a lake, dipping the sheets in the ice water, putting them on their bare backs, and by generating body heat, drying out these bed sheets. extraordinary, the control that they have of these autonomic functions that are programmed deep into the ancient brain, the reptilian brain. We also know that we can use the breath to reset the brain, that we can take deep, regular, relaxing breaths, and that this will reset the parasympathetic nervous system. That the breath is one of these autonomic functions that we can actually use to regulate our core physiology. Sitting on top of the reptilian brain is the mammalian brain that we share with all the mammals. Every mammal has this brain, the limbic brain, what I call the Neanderthal brain. And this is the brain of the emotions. This brain has ancient survival programs encoded in it in the form of emotions. So the shamans that I spent time with in the Amazon and the Andes believed that you could not heal your emotions, that you simply had to get rid of your emotions, discard them, because they were ancient survival programs that were no longer useful to us today. In discarding our emotions, we would be able then to have feelings, and feelings were authentic. Emotions were ancient survival programs that predisposed us to dislike some people, to be attracted to others, to project our hostility into the stranger or into the enemy, and very, very toxic. Now, interestingly, the human brain seems to reset itself every 20 minutes. It goes through a gentle reset process. And the difference between a feeling and an emotion is that if it lasts more than 20 minutes, it's not a feeling. We've all been angry for 20 minutes. Some of us have been angry for 20 days, and some of us have been angry for 20 years. This is not a feeling. This is an emotion. Emotions are neural networks programmed in this ancient limbic brain that define our experience of reality. Many of the patients that we work with are coming with burdensome and tragic emotions that are resident in this ancient limbic brain, in this Neanderthal brain, that we have to help them to reprogram. This brain, the limbic brain, only changes through ceremony. And this is a really important thing for us to remember. The more ancient reptilian brain only changes through food and pain. Now, I went to a Catholic elementary school, and I still remember Mother Mary Immaculata, who used to walk down the hallways with her ruler that she would discipline us with, smack our knuckles with her ruler. Now, she believed that children learned best through pain. And she may or may not have been right, but this is, of course, the ancient model. So this ancient reptilian brain changes through pain, and it changes through food. The mammalian brain changes through ceremony. It needs ceremony in order to change. You cannot change the limbic mind unless you change the limbic brain. And this brain only changes through ceremony, through wedding ceremony, through rites of passage to become a man or to become a woman, rites of passage that we have lost and forgotten, and through rites of menopause, and of course the rites of birth and the rites of death. Now, if you don't go through your initiation, through your ceremony of becoming a man, you remain an adolescent throughout your entire life. When you're under stress or having an argument with your spouse, you revert back to that last stage that you established territory over. And for many men, it's when they were 13 or 14. And you start pouting again and becoming angry with your partner and unable to resolve conflict elegantly. And then reverting back to one of the four emotions of that limbic brain. The four emotions are fear, feeding, fighting, and predatory sexuality. We get frustrated and we get angry and we make ourselves right. So I used to ask my patients, do you want to win or do you want to be right? And almost 100% of the time they tell me that they want to win, but when they got into that argument with their loved one, they wanted to be right. So this ancient limbic brain only changes through ceremony. So as therapists, we need to learn how we can create ceremonies in our offices so that we can help to transform these toxic emotions of fear, of feeding. Feeding is scarcity. It's when we feel we don't have enough time or enough money or enough love or enough of anything. And then we have to go to our partner or to our boss and asking them to fix our scarcity, our sense of scarcity that we experience. I need more love. I need more from you. I need you to be this way. That deep hole of longing that we have in our hearts that we expect the other to fill with us. These are the four emotions: fear. And when we don't resolve these emotions, we tend to project them into the world. They become hidden in our shadow, in the parts of ourselves that we disown, and we project onto the other, into the enemy, onto the stranger. And I remember being out to dinner with my wife in this restaurant in LA, and we were a little bit jet lagged. So we went to dinner early, and there was no one else in the restaurant except a really old couple, probably in their late 80s. And they weren't talking to each other. And suddenly he says to her, "Pass the salt." And we were startled to hear this. And what he was really saying was, "Pass the salt, you wench. You ruined my life." And here you have a couple that have become intimate enemies. They continue to project onto the other the fact that they were miserable in their life. And of course, that was accompanied by a set of beliefs that said, I'll never find another partner. At 90, I'll never be able to be happy with somebody else again. And I just have to kind of live with this as best I can. So this neuroplasticity that the brain is known for can best be accessed through ceremony. And it doesn't have to be complex religious ceremonies. There's simply little acts of courage that we can do in our office that can help our clients or ourselves when we're in the need of it to step beyond fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of some microbe that is going to destroy our lives, our health, and our career. That's going to help us get through anger. That's going to help us get through a sense of scarcity, of not having enough. That's going to help us heal the violence within us. Because one of the four core emotions is violence, is aggression, is fighting. And the worst kind of fighting that we do is not necessarily with the other, but with ourselves. When I've had a chance to work a little bit with elite special force teams in the United States, in the military, and they are trained not to think of the other as the bad guy and as the enemy, but as simply a very cunning adversary. So you don't have a big emotional charge about defending freedom and protecting the land of the brave. No, you're dealing with a very cunning adversary that you can deal with from the higher brain and not from the emotional brain. Because these four emotions will blind us to the moment and to reality. So in my breakout session, I'm going to share with you some of the small rites of passage that we can do in our office, from lighting a candle to blowing an emotion into a stone and inviting our patient to take it home and to throw it in the forest. Some kind of act or gesture where they create a small ceremony for themselves that makes sense to them. Not a complex religious ritual, but a small act of courage and power. And these are the things that allow us to step beyond the programming of this ancient brain. So again, the four emotions of the limbic brain are fear. feeding, scarcity, fighting, and predatory sexuality. Predatory sexuality that becomes the compensation for the lack of intimacy in our lives, that we want to satisfy through a very animal, physical kind of connection. It's amazing that 50% of the internet is porn. This is that fourth emotion of the limbic brain. This is a very ancient brain. It's a Neanderthal brain. It's a brain that we shared with our distant cousins and that allowed them to codify their behavior into ritual. The ritual that said, do not go more than half a day from the home cave because you need the other half a day to get back before the sun set and the cold made you freeze to death. So during this ice age that they survived, it was a very ritualistic life that allowed them to embed the codes of behavior that made them successful for so many centuries, millennia. But then the ice began to melt and our ancestors, Homo sapiens, began to descend from the high mountains to the fertile valleys, and our Neanderthal cousins became extinct. The Neanderthals were known as lowbrows because their frontal lobes of their brain were not present. Their forehead sloped backwards, whereas we're highbrows. We have the frontal lobes of the brain and the neocortex. The neocortex is the new brain. Neo is new, cortex, the new brain that looks like a walnut, that has these convolutions on its surface to give it greater amount of surface for extraordinarily rapid neural processing. So while the ancient brain changed through ceremony, the Neanderthal brain, the neocortex, which is the brain of feelings, it's the brain of mathematics, it's the brain of Mozart and Bach and of quantum physics. This brain changes through bliss and through epiphany. So what I discovered with the shamans in the high Andes is that for them to facilitate transformation in their clients, in their patients, in their community, they had to upgrade that individual to a higher level of functioning. They had to invite them to operate out of the neocortex, out of that new brain that was able to see relationships, that was able to experience yourself as connected, interconnected with every other member of the village and with the nature around us. And when that brain wasn't operating, then you would revert back to that Neanderthal brain that was all about number one, that was all about me, that was all about healing me, that was all about how am I going to profit from this? What's in it for me? Whereas the higher brain, the neocortex, deals with what is better for we. We, including not only the family and the village, but our nature around us and Mother Earth and the planet. So that you have this dawning sense of stewardship that happens in this new brain.